I've had so many ideas for this video series that just didn't work recently. The GOG versions of Metal Gear Solids 1 and 2 play terribly, the Resident Evil 4 Remake's demo has constant graphical glitches, and Warzone 2.0 won't even launch. But let's dive into a game that I've played a lot on PC and have nearly 1,000 hours clocked in across PS4 and more recently PS5. An adventure in the Fallout universe that a lot of people don't like, but I do, especially after all the NPCs, story expansions, and new stuff they've added over the years. Let's see how the Steam Deck can run Fallout 76. As far as settings go, the game is certainly playable on pretty much all main presets, but what frame target you want will depend on what settings you use. I personally recommend using Proton and not just normal Linux, as Proton will give you a decent boost in performance. And before moving on, it's worth noting that all settings will have some variance when you first enter or fast travel to an area. As the assets load in, you'll get a bit below what the norm will be. For example, on low settings, you might get an average of 55 FPS in a certain area, but when you first load in, it might be in the 40s for a while. Now for testing, I centered on 3 areas for different amounts of stress on the deck. The first was Ripper Alley, the small Blood Eagle outpost outside of Westech. The second was the exterior of Westech itself that's always filled with super mutants and hounds. And finally was a radiation zone. Now what I really wanted to do with this last one was the Scorch Beast Queen raid battle, but after spending several hours of server hopping every couple minutes and not finding the event once, let alone 3 times, I decided to just use that final test being a radiation zone in general. If I discover the event in the future, I'll put the performance info for it in the comments below. Now starting with low settings, Ripper Alley gets about 57 to 60 FPS pretty consistently. It stays mostly around 60, but will drop down into that mid to high 50s range pretty often. When moving on to Westech, low settings sticks around the 40s and 50s for about half a minute or so, and then settles in mostly around the 50s and up to 60. And finally, the radiation zone. On low settings, you get averages around 45 FPS if you're running around a Scorch Beast and a bunch of Scorch, with dips down into the 30s every so often. Now this is pretty good, better than the console experience. Even when you play the PS4 version on a PS5, as you're seeing right here, it only balances out to a smooth out 30 FPS since Bethesda didn't make a next-gen update to 76. At least not yet. But with low having such good results, I decided to go up to medium. With medium turned on, Ripper Alley gets mostly low to mid 50s on frame rate, but it does regularly drop into the 40s. And that 40s range turns into the norm in more populated areas. The Westech Center's exterior averaged 45 to 47 FPS overall, and the radiation zones are very similar to what we got on low settings. It averages around 44 to 45 and dips down into the 30s every so often. This is still really good and still better than console. So let's bump it up into high settings and we start to see cracks here and there. On high settings, Ripper Alley gets an average of the high 40s and the more populated Westech will give us an average around the 38 FPS range. This is still great, but it's the radiation zones in transitioning areas, i.e. exploring, that brings us dips down below 30 FPS. The radiation zones on high settings have mostly in the 30 range, but every once in a while it'll dip down into the 26 to 28 FPS range. This will also happen every once in a while when you're just exploring. As you wander around the world, that 30 and 40 FPS range on high settings will occasionally dip down into the 28 range when it's loading in more assets. It's not all that often, and it's still way above what the PlayStation 4 version gets on a PS4, but it's worth noting that high settings will not get you a consistently above 30 FPS frame rate. Now with all of this info, if you're looking for a console-like experience here, you can get it easily. Put yourself on lower medium settings and lock the Steam Deck down to 30 FPS and you'll have the console experience with the much faster and better loading of the PC version. So in conclusion, would I recommend Fallout 76 to Steam Deck users? I probably would. Steer clear of high settings and you're going to get a frame rate much higher than what you get on any current or next gen console. Or if you just want to mimic that experience with the better load times of the PC version, you can just lock the Steam Deck down to 30 and it'll be just fine. A lot of people don't like Fallout 76, but if you're like me and do, you're going to get some really nice results when you take it on the go. And that's all I have for you today. I'll be back soon with more Steam Deck coverage and reviews. As always, thank you for watching and have a great day.